It's a good sign, isn't it, when I'm so busy talking to the next speaker because she's so interesting that I forgot to stand up and actually introduce her. So you can look forward to the talk ahead. My name is Danielle O'Donovan, and I'm a member of the West Cork History Festival Committee, as it's correctly said in these parts. And I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Caroline Campbell. Caroline was born and raised in Belfast, and she became the director of the National Gallery of Ireland in November 2022. Caroline has held curatorial positions in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, the Courtauld Gallery in London, and the National Gallery in London, where she was Director of Collections and Research from 2018 to 22. Caroline has published widely on Western art, particularly the Italian Renaissance. The Italian Renaissance is new. You heard it here. I was talking about convents and started talking about sistry instead of history, which I think also works quite well. So she's published widely on Western art, particularly the Italian Renaissance, and she has curated many exhibitions, including Mantegna and Bellini, and the forthcoming show, Siena, The Rise of Painting, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, and the National Gallery, London, from 2024 to 2025. Her first book, The Power of Art, was published in autumn 2023. The work sets art in the political and social context of its creation. Radically breaking from the narrative of the artist or the patron, we instead are taught to understand the power of art in history and in our everyday lives. And it's a brilliant read. I've read a number of chapters already, and it's available just behind you, so you can all pick up a copy. Caroline, you're very welcome.
Thank you very, very much, Danielle, and thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today in West Cork. And it's a very important to be, the subject I'm talking about you today is something which is really timely, because yesterday the National Gallery of Ireland celebrated the 170th anniversary of its foundation on the 10th of August 1854. And so my talk today is a little bit about the role of the gallery in Irish life. Now, I'm only going to be speaking for about 40 minutes, so I'm not going to get through very much of that at all. It's a subject which really requires a thorough investigation, probably in forms of a book and a research project, because what I don't want to do is give an institutional history of the gallery. There is a really wonderful one, and there are many great works on the gallery and other museums in the Irish context from an institutional perspective. But what I want to think about today is really more to reflect about what it means to people in Ireland to have a national gallery, what it's meant in the past, what it's meant in the present, and what it might also mean in the future. So I want to really start before the foundation of the National Gallery, but to look at Dublin towards the end of the 18th century. And I'm going to start with an image of Trinity College, just in the centre of the city. And you all know far better than me how significant Dublin was in European terms in the 18th century. What an extraordinary, vibrant, exciting city it was. And it was a city that by the early of the 19th century, even after the Parliament had gone, had what you might call many of the accoutrements of a modern civilized city. So, if you can see on the screen, you have the Royal Dublin Society, founded in 1731, the Royal Irish Academy, founded in 1785. My image is a bit confusing because you're seeing it as it looks today in Ely Place, a very modern building indeed, but it is a very illustrious building. The Royal Irish Academy of Music, founded in 1848, so a little bit of a latecomer, and the Royal Hibernian Academy, the RHA, founded in 1823. But what the gallery what Dublin did not have, what Ireland did not have at this moment, was a national gallery. There were many important art collections. Very few of them were accessible to many people who were outside a very elite circle. And I think I really want to look today about why it was important that Dublin and Ireland had a gallery and what the benefit that has been for life in the island in the next subsequent 170 years since the gallery's foundation, 170 years ago yesterday. Now, we all know how absolutely appalling things were in Ireland in the 1850s, but it is important to reflect that the gallery is founded at a moment when things were really at the country's absolute nadir in many respects. And I'm showing you here Ernst and Nicol, the Scott painter's romanticised but still terrible view of an ejected family, painted in 1853. Nicol spent the years 1846 to 1850 in Ireland and subsequently returned to the island every summer. 1853 was also significant for an event which followed this great event in London in 1851. And this is the great exhibition in Hyde Park, the Crystal Palace, which of course was open in 1851. And in 1853, there was the great industrial exhibition on Leinster Lawn in central Dublin. The complex that I'm showing you here on the screen was an extraordinary one for a temporary structure. It was designed by John Benson, but the exhibition itself only ran from the end of May to the end of October. And during that time, it attracted over 1 million visitors, extraordinary for such a short period of months. The exhibition was visited by many people of all orders of society. Queen Victoria and the Print Consort made an official visit in August 1853. But going inside it, you saw quite an unbelievable plethora of things. And I think you get a sense of this from this photograph of 1853, a photograph by Edward Tennyson King that's today in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. You see firstly how huge the tent, the structure was itself, and how it was constructed of metal. And you see again the galleries, and you see the spaces all around. What was different to the industrial exhibition in Dublin, to the exhibition in London several years before, was that there was much more fine art in it. And this was apparently one of the most striking elements of the exhibition in Dublin in 1853. And the reason I'm telling you this story, of course, was that this was completely fundamental to the foundation of the National Gallery of Ireland the subsequent year, 1854. And yesterday, as I was standing on Merrion Square, looking at the building as it exists today, as we were welcoming visitors in, as we do every day, but for our special celebrations for 170, I reflected a lot on that, but also on the figure who you see on the screen here, who was really the person who we really owe, if we owe to anybody, the foundation of the National Gallery. Oh, is the slide not working? Oh no, I'm so sorry. I've been talking and not showing you these things. Here is the wonderful view by Tennyson King of the exhibition in the picture that's now this salted negative that's now in the National Gallery in Washington. And I think you see, you know, it's like a medieval church almost, but it's an industrial space. That, of course, is quite significant in terms of the architectural language. And here is William Dargan, as you see him, not for once having the indignity of a seagull splatting or sitting on his head. Such are the roles that come to figures in public life through time. But as he stands in front of the National Gallery of Ireland, the gallery that really he was the most important force behind its foundation, Dargan, as many of you know, is a really, really interesting figure because he introduced Ireland's railway network, and that's probably how we know him more. But he was really significant in the foundation of the National Gallery because he believed, together with a lot of people throughout Europe and the Western world in the 1850s and 60s, that an art gallery was part of the essential accoutrements of society. It was what you needed for what were called, in somewhat often patronizing terms, a civilizing influence, but the intention was really good, was that as human beings, we didn't just need to be fed and watered and looked after, not that so much of that was going on in the 1850s, but we needed a lot of better things in our lives, things that we could aspire towards, things that would make us feel that there was something worthwhile in being human. And Dargan and the founders of the National Gallery, institutional and individual, all felt that it was very important that the gallery should be free, that the gallery should be somewhere where as many people as possible could visit, and that's why it ended up being sited in central Dublin. And also that it should show a range of art, not just Irish art, and in fact the gallery didn't collect much Irish art for quite a long time, but international art. And it was intended to give people something which would inspire them and hopefully give them pleasure and enjoyment as well. And those are still very, very important reasons that guide our activity at the National Gallery of Ireland. Like many galleries today, it's really our modus operandi, and it's also really our mission and purpose. So I don't want, as I said, to talk too much about the institutional history of the National Gallery. This is more about the people. But I did want to share with you some of the very, very beautiful material we have in our archive relating to the gallery's foundation and construction. And these are some of the drawings by Francis Fowke, like myself, a Belfast native. He was a member of the Royal Engineers. He went on to build many important cultural and institutional buildings across these islands and beyond, including the Royal Albert Hall. But these are his studies for the great hall that was the centre of the National Gallery. A building that when it opened finally 10 years later, in January 1854, was one of the most innovative museum buildings at that stage anywhere in the world. And I'm showing you the Grand Gallery, at that time called the Queen's Gallery, when the gallery was open to the public on the 30th of January 1864. You can see not just that it's flocked with people and also with pictures, more of that later, but that it's a space which, like the space I showed you of the Great Exhibition, is vaulted, is traditional, but is also in many ways very, very obviously modern and contemporary of its period. When you go into the Grand Gallery in person today and you look up, you are struck by the fact that everything is metal. This is not a building of stone. It is on the outside, but it's an industrial building in some ways, like the Great Industrial Exhibition that it came out of. It also was one of the first museums in the world to have air conditioning. The air conditioning, unfortunately, wasn't so good by the 1980s. Some of us may remember it then, but at its time, it was one of the most novel and significant examples of museum architecture anywhere in the world. It also had artificial lighting, which, again, was not introduced in other places for quite some time. So I think when I first came to the National Gallery in the late 1980s, I was struck by how beautiful the pictures were, but also by how slightly dilapidated it was. So I think it's really important to remember that the gallery, from its very beginning, was something that was up there with some of the great museum buildings. One other important factor about the gallery, before I go on to talking about art, is the purposes for its foundation and existence. One major one is that everyone will go, and I'll talk more about that. And other was that it would provide a space for artists to learn from the great artists of the past, and also in ways that would hopefully impact positively on their practice. The gallery's first director, George Mulvaney, which I show you here, was a significant artist. He was the keeper of the Royal Hibernian Academy schools and a really very talented painter. And since the 1850s, the gallery has always had members of the various Dublin learned societies on its board. Most important in terms of numbers are the artists, the members of the Royal Hibernian Academy, of which we have 3 co-opted members, including the current president, Abigail O'Brien, who I'm showing you here. But from its very beginning, the gallery was thought to be a place for study. And so the early collection, as it's formed, was not just pictures, it was objects that would be useful to artists in their artistic training. And I'm showing you here a view by Richard Thomas Moynihan of what was called the cast gallery at the National Gallery of Ireland. And what you will see is an artist who is taking measurements. He's standing in front of his easel in the space, and he is taking measurements from what he sees around him that then we assume he's putting onto the canvas on the easel before him. But he's in this wonderful space, which is full of copies of celebrated artworks from all over the world. Many of these were drawn from the collection of the British Museum in London, which of course at this moment was involved in excavations in many places, in what is in Nineveh, in Mesopotamia, of course previous to that in parts of the classical world. And this was a very important part of an artist's education. But another highly significant part of an artist's education was, of course, looking at pictures. And this was an area where the early National Gallery of Ireland had quite a lot of difficulty. From 1853, the great building was being built. When it opened in 1864, there were only 100 pictures in the gallery's collection. And if you look at the records of the gallery searching for pictures in the 1850s, there seem to be 2 primary considerations. One is that they should represent the work by artists not from Ireland, and specifically from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. And the other, more practical, but equally important, was that they should be as large as possible. And I think you don't have to think too much about the rationale for that. Consequently, the gallery does have a collection of large Baroque paintings that few other galleries in the Western world can rival. I'm showing you here Carlo Maratta's The Rape of Europa. This was one of the first objects bought for the gallery in the 1850s, when there was a lot of looking for work in Rome. Rome at this stage was one of the main centres of the picture trade in Europe. It wasn't as important as it had been in the 18th century, but there were still ways in which you could acquire great works of art, particularly by artists who quite possibly weren't as fashionable as they had been before. Now, Maratta, who is one of the most significant Roman artists of the late 17th and early 18th century, was not as well beloved in the 1850s as he had been. Do any of you know the writings of the English thinker John Ruskin? Well, Ruskin really hated Baroque painting. He said he didn't want to see any more works by Guido Reni or his contemporaries, of which Maratta is one. And again, we do see quite a lot of them in the early collections of the National Gallery of Ireland. I happen to love this work, apart from its size. It's full of life and vibrancy, and it is very striking. It does also cover a lot of wall space. So you would have been seeing a lot of works of this in the gallery in the 1860s and 70s. But the collection, as it evolved, I think has become one of the great collections, great European collections, not just in these islands, but also in Europe. But interestingly, the gallery has, like many other national galleries, has really mirrored the wider society in which it's part. And something that I find very, very interesting about the gallery and its history is that the gallery has very, very rarely been closed. I'm showing you a view of one of the rare occasions when it was. This was in the 1920s. The gallery was shut from December 1922 to February 1924. This is still the largest period that the gallery has been closed in its history, apart from the COVID pandemic of a couple of years ago. But I hope you can see the writing at the bottom of my slide, which is from the minute books of the Board of Trustees. And it might be able to see that the director said that although the damage had been done, the gallery was actually attacked during some of the incidents in Dublin during these years, that despite the fact that the fabric of the gallery was damaged, it was still going to be possible to keep the gallery open for as soon as possible. And you can, I think what's rather interesting in this image is that you see pictures on the floor as well. This is a moment when things were being moved around. But the sense was that very much this was a public resource and it should be kept open and active as long as possible. The impact I think that that had on people can be measured by the stories of many individuals, as well, of course, as collective. And one of the individuals that I think is most striking is the case of George Bernard Shaw. I'm showing you the statue of George Bernard Shaw that greets all visitors who come into the National Gallery of Ireland from the Clare Street entrance. Shaw on a plinth, so he looks taller than he was. A rather imposing view indeed by the Russian emigre artist Prince Trubetsky, a statue that's actually we're lending to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris next year for a major exhibition. Shaw, you may remember, had a very lonely, very unhappy childhood in Dublin. And he recounted that the gallery was one of the very few places where he felt at home and where he felt he'd like anything like an education. So when Shaw died in the early 1950s, he left a rather complex will, the details of which I will not go into, but you might find interesting if you have time to look. His royalties were left to organizations, including something that would found a universal language. But after the legal disputes that went on, the National Gallery of Ireland was able to avail of a third of his royalties. And until the early 2020s, when these have begun to run out, this has been an incredible source of money for the gallery, not to do things that are not for public benefit, but essentially to buy pictures. And I just wanted to show you a couple of the objects that have come through the Shaw Fund. There are about 70 paintings, a number of sculpture. They really are highly significant works, ranging from Nathaniel Hone's rather crazed Conjurer of 1775, a painting which was at the centre, incidentally, of the first monographic or single artist exhibition held anywhere in the world. That was an exhibition that Hone himself curated in London in the 1770s. A really quite strange and wonderful and important work, not just in Irish terms, and a painting from the early 15th century, a painting made by an Italian artist working in Avignon. Again, very, very rare example of this type of work. And so we've been able to have a huge amount of variety and depth to our collection through Shaw's munificence. And it's wonderful to be able to share that with our audiences for public benefit, as Dargan and indeed subsequently as Shaw very much intended. One of the peculiarities of the National Gallery of Ireland compared to other national galleries elsewhere in Europe, America and in these islands is that we are also the National Portrait Collection. And I want to reflect just a little bit about what that means and what that means for the gallery's role in public life. I think it means that we're always trying to acquire portraits that we think will be interesting, maybe challenging, and often that will be incredibly popular. It ends up us being able to not take off the walls, for instance, Graham Norton's portrait by Gareth Reid. Every time that goes off display, there are huge complaints. There are letters to the director. There are things left at the information desk. That's exactly how it should be. That shows we're a functioning institution and one that people love. Another object that people find it very, very difficult to do without, and actually I would count myself in that category, is this very moving photograph of Seamus Heaney in his kitchen in Sandymount, taken by Jackie Nickerson in 2007, just a few years before Seamus Heaney's death. I particularly love this image because it is so personal, it is so intimate, and it shows somebody whose writing we all love, I'm sure all of us love and admire, but in a context which we'd all be very familiar. It's the fridge behind with the fridge magnets, which I think really, really, really does it for me. But also to try and tell stories and tell versions of Irishness, which people maybe even 30 or 40 years ago might not have felt it was appropriate that the National Gallery of Ireland should have a portrait of Marian Keyes. As someone who's loved her writing, and it got me through many sticky patches as a student in the 1990s, I'm thrilled that we can show a whole variety on our walls. And the portrait collection is probably the most loved part of the gallery's collection today. But one thing I've really noticed in the 2 years that I've returned to live and work in Ireland from London is the connections that people have to individual works. I'm not saying that people don't have connections to works in other cities. One of my most depressing and upsetting moments as a curator at the National Gallery was when a lady came to see me in floods of tears because I'd moved Piero della Francesca's baptism. And it was a really important moment for me because I'd moved it to somewhere where I thought it was more art historically appropriate. But when she sat down and told me that this was a picture she came and looked at every day and it really got her through life, I felt I shouldn't move pictures without thinking about it very much, really. And it's something that as an art historian, when you're thinking too much possibly of the art history, you forget that public galleries are always for public purpose. One painting that I think is among the most loved pictures in our collection is Vermeer's woman writing a letter at a table. A painting which, if you're in the gallery between now and next Sunday, you will be able to see with a very closely related work by Vermeer that is never going to travel again. And that's another lady writing a letter from the Frick collection in New York. The Frick can't usually lend from its main collection. They're closed at the moment for refurbishment, and so we've been very fortunate in Dublin to bring these two women together for the first time since they were, first of all, in Vermeer's studio, and then hanging on the walls of a collector in the 1880s. But the Dublin Vermeer, which has only been in the collection since 1987, it's a pretty recent addition through the munificence of the Bites. When this painting was lent to the Rijksmuseum last year for the great exhibition they did in Vermeer, when I went to the show, I was very struck by the number of Irish people I met on the various occasions I was there saying, that's our painting, that's ours, and we're really pleased that it's here. Again, I haven't seen something that sort of feature in the way people react to other national collections. But in terms of something being our collection and being a gallery for all of the people in Ireland, not just the people in Dublin, it's important that we try and spread the collection more widely. And at the moment, as part of this endeavour, we have lent The Taking of Christ by Caravaggio, which doesn't belong to the gallery, but which is on permanent loan to us from the Society of Jesus. And many of you will know the incredible story of this picture's discovery in the 1990s. The painting is currently on loan at the Ulster Museum in Belfast, where it's with another painting by Caravaggio, made for the same patron in Rome in the early 17th centuries, and that's the Supper at Emmaus from the National Gallery in London. We were lucky enough in Dublin to see these two pictures together in 2017, but in Belfast there has never been a Caravaggio on view, and now they have two. They've had over 50,000 visitors to this exhibition in the last 4 months. The pictures are together in Belfast until the 1st of September. As a Belfast native, I cannot tell you how happy it makes for the pictures to be there, but I know that everyone will also be equally happy down south when The Taking of Christ comes back to Dublin in a few weeks' time. But this idea of sharing is something that's really important, because a national collection can't just be accessible in one place. It has to be able to travel, our programs have to be able to move more, and that's something we're going to think about more in the next few years. Just a few more slides, really, from me about paintings that are very much loved and why this is the case. There may be people in this room who've got married in the registry office, the main registry office in Dublin. Is there anyone here? No? Amazing. But if you are, or if you go to a wedding there, you get married in front of a copy of what was voted in a somewhat dubious poll possibly in 2010 to be Ireland's most famous, most favourite painting. And that's a very small watercolour by Frederick William Burton, a 19th century Irish artist who made most of his career in London. It's about this size. It's so popular that although you can't really expose watercolours to light, we have to have it accessible. So we've come up with a compromise that twice a week, I think it's from 1:30 to 2:30 on Sundays and 11:30 to 12:30 on Wednesdays, but I might be wrong, so don't just check it on the website before you come. A little box is opened in the room where we show our stained glass, and people can see this. But people love it, partly because many people in the last 30 years have got married in front of it in the registry office, but also it is a tragic but wonderful moment of love. And certainly, if you were looking at the National Gallery's collection from an art historical guise, you would not say this was one of the top works in the collection, but it definitely is in terms of people's public reaction, and that is really important for us to listen to and learn. Another painting you will not be surprised to know is unbelievably popular is the Liffey Swim. And as we reach that time of the year when those mad individuals are preparing to throw themselves into the Liffey within the next few weeks, the painting is not on view at the moment. We've lent it to an important exhibition about the Olympics, but in the last 6 months we've had it on display in the gallery together with Jack B. Yeats' silver medal. Maybe until this year people weren't so familiar with the fact that Ireland's first Olympic medal was not won by an athlete, but it was won by Jack B. Yeats for this painting, which got a silver medal in 1924, the first year that Ireland competed in the Olympics. Until 1948, there was a cultural Olympiad that went along with the physical Olympiad, and it's great to have Ireland's first Olympic medal winner in our national collection. Because I'm really wary of time, I'm going to just skip through a few images and encourage you to come and look at them in the gallery. I wanted to think a bit about what the gallery in public life means apart from the collection. And I think that's really in terms of the programs and activities that we do. Having a collection accessible doesn't mean just opening your doors. It means doing things that people want to come and see, and also bringing people who might not necessarily think the collection is for them into the gallery. And this is a tradition that really has been very paramount in the activity of the National Gallery of Ireland, and certainly really in terms of museum education since the 1950s. James White, the much loved gallery director in the 1960s and 70s, was a wonderful publicist for the gallery. He wrote lots of really good introductory books. He started the first museum education program really in Ireland, and I think today this is now an even bigger part of our activity. We're always welcoming groups of school children to the gallery. This is a group who came proudly and had their photos taken outside when they were with us in May. This is something I view with great pleasure every day from my window. We also do an awful lot of family activities. This is National Drawing Day from May, when people came into the collection and did a huge mural on the floor of the showroom in front of Macleish's, Aoife and Strongbow, but also covered the gallery's banners and the gallery's outside walls in Merrion Square with self-portraits and images. Thinking about how the gallery continues to remain part of national life is really significant to us, and one way is of course by activities such as the National Annual Portrait Prize. You've got no more time to entry this year, but you've got time to think about what you might do next year if you want. We have a competition for under 18s and also for artists over 18, and here are last year's winners: David Stevenson, the photographer, photographer with his wonderful diptyque of a couple seated together but also separate in a cafe in Wexford, and also Rory Conlon, the 15-year-old from South Dublin, who made this incredibly confident, brilliant image of himself in front of this yellow background. Someone who he told me when he won had only started painting a couple of years ago and had never thought it was something for him. Continuing to make the gallery something that is part of life is also about the programs we do in terms of our exhibitions and our displays. And that's something which changes a lot too. I think in the 1870s, when the gallery was founded, nobody would have thought it was important to do an exhibition about Lavinia Fontana. Lavinia Fontana, who's Solomon and the Queen of Sheba that you see here, is the first artist who was female to have a professional career outside the confines of a court or a convent. She was working in Bologna in the middle years of the 16th and the early 17th century. One of her very greatest paintings, Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, entered our collection in 1870, like the Murata I showed you, because it was large and it was because relatively cheap. We are now really proud of having this work in this collection and devoted the first major monographic exhibition, shockingly, devoted to any woman artist at the gallery only last year in 2023. And I'm just showing you not just the picture, but the poster, the image that greeted you as you walked through central Dublin, as you hopefully came to see the exhibition or thought more about it last summer. But just to end, really, I wanted to think about how the gallery can continue to stay active. And it's through our collections, it's through our displays, it's through our activities, but it's also really for making people feel that it is a place for them, a welcoming place where you can come, whether you want to draw, whether you want to look at art, or whether you just want to sit and somewhere which is a space for you. And last year, we welcomed over 1 million visitors through our doors. That's a really interesting statistic when you think about the population of this island, and when, if you read things like the art newspaper, as I do, many museums around the world are having reductions in their visitor numbers. We are really bucking the trend in Ireland, and that's partly because our museums are free, which is an enormous thing we should think about, and has been the case. They've always been possible to have free access to our collection since the 1860s. But also because, hopefully, we seem to be doing something right. And I just wanted to end on a very personal note. I first came to the National Gallery of Ireland myself as a child. My mother brought me down on the train from Belfast. We came to get the dress for my school formal, which is what we in the north call, what here is called your Deb's dance. And we started the day by going to the gallery, and my mum took me to see her very favourite painting, which was Lady Lavery. And I look at it every day, but we all have the option to do that every day. We all have stories with these paintings and with these collections. And I hope that your story and journey with the gallery will continue to develop, and that of your children over the years and centuries, I hope, to come. Thank you.
Caroline rather brilliantly has kept us bang on time, so we have time therefore for questions for Caroline.
Question and a little comment. If you can think of the statistic, how will I phrase this? What would be the ratio of times that you lend paintings out as opposed to borrow them? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Right, that's my question. And the other is, oh my gosh, oh yes, second question, do you come under any pressure from the government to change it being free? And if you do, I hope you resist it. And my comment is for anybody in the audience who isn't aware of it, I know that it isn't all about the gallery, but Homan Potterson's biography is a very enjoyable read on all sorts of fronts, including a bit about the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your question and observation. So in terms of lending and borrowing, we lend generously. We also borrow regularly. I think it's very important to have objects coming in as well as objects going out. And it's also important to be changing our displays in the gallery so that we have paintings that rotate, objects that rotate, and people get to see. Think that obviously sometimes pictures have to be in store, but we try to move things around and to lend so that objects are accessible. We have a collection of about 17,000 objects. Most of those are works on paper. Works on paper are not objects that can be shown all the time because they're really sensitive to light and also to changes in humidity. But of the paintings collection, which is about 4,000, you know, we would have a reasonable a lot out, and we would be lending generously too in Ireland and outside. And in terms of the, yes, I do recommend Homan Potterton's book as well too. He was a brilliant writer. I wish I'd met him. Sadly, I never did. But he writes so beautifully about the gallery, and sometimes at very difficult moments as well too, but about other things as well.
Charlie Hockey moment.
Charlie Hockey moment, indeed.
Sorry, I hope I didn't miss it. I was sitting outside, I could hear most of it, so I hope you haven't covered this already. But just in terms of the National Gallery, in terms of telling a national story, where does the National Gallery, is there a scale? Because I was just I think it was in Riga and last week, and very much the galleries there seemed to be kind of like, almost their purpose was to tell the nation story rather than be educational. And from what you're saying, this wasn't really the purpose originally seen for the National Gallery. It was more educational, was it, rather than being part of a national, driving the national narrative? Is that how did the gallery sit in that story?
Well, I think the gallery, of course, is part of a national narrative because of being a national gallery and being part of Irish life. So, it's integral really to what the experience of living and being in Ireland is, and has been, maybe not integral, but it's certainly significant over the last 170 years. I mean, in terms of telling the national story, in terms of history, that is not really the role of the National Gallery of Ireland. It is a gallery of art, and it can be interpreted in all sorts of different ways. I mean, also in Dublin and in Ireland, we have the National Museum, which is much more tasked with that role of telling the story of the island and telling the story of the nation. Obviously, we do tell that story, but we tell other stories too. And one of our stories, I think, majorly, is that of artistic innovation and also of connection between the past and the present, but also between Ireland and elsewhere.
Did the Bite collection go to the National Gallery, or did they retain it? And is it correct to hold a collection like that, which was probably gathered from South African near slave labour, if not slave labour?
So the question was about the Bite collection, and there are a number of works in the National Gallery of Ireland which came from Alfred and Clementine Bite. That's a group of paintings, including the Vermeer that I showed, which came into the collection in 1987. Most of the Bite collection is in the possession of the Alfred Bite Foundation, and that is at Rusborough House in Blessington.
You mentioned about the complaints or the comments that the gallery receives. I wonder, would the gallery consider publishing or displaying some of the complaints about pictures, or maybe collecting them in an anthology? Because as a cultural exercise, it would be very interesting. And if someone did some research and went back over the years and put them on a nice display, would the gallery consider that? Please.
Well, that's a wonderful question. The gallery indeed has and does put some of the complaints from the past up on display. We have a fantastic team of librarians and archivists who are very, very good also because they're very public focused as well too. And regularly in the changing displays that they put on in Gallery 11 in the gallery, you will find exactly that sort of information. And I think that is a way of telling a history which is less an institutional but more of a people's history. It's also really important for public bodies to reflect and to think about what people don't like as well as what they do like when they come and visit. So complaints are always, you know, well, welcome is the wrong word, but they're always greeted with great interest and generally acted on.
You said the Liffey swim painting is in an exhibition at the moment related to the Olympics. Is it in Paris?
It's not in Paris. It was going to. It was requested and we agreed to lend it to an exhibition in Paris on the Olympics, but then they were having to cut costs and so they didn't, the picture didn't end up traveling there. But it is in an exhibition in Cambridge at the moment, a very major research-driven exhibition about the Olympics and art. And it's there until I think October, and then we will put it back on display. But we had a display of the Liffey swim and the medal, and Yeats's own archival material relating to it for the first part of this year in the gallery, and including Yeats's scrapbook. Jack Yeats kept cuttings for almost every time his art was exhibited and released, and it's fascinating seeing how he was creating his narrative for himself as well too.
Any other questions for Caroline? Oh.
Well, I don't know because I don't think I've ever asked them. I think you know, I'm thrilled to be in this role. It's a gallery I've known since I was a child, and it means a lot to me to be there and to be leading the work that we're doing. Hopefully, meaning that more people will come and visit and make it part of their lives.
Oh, since you've taken over the running of the gallery, the new monthly review that you publish is absolutely wonderful. It's so refreshing. It's different from before, and I get it every month, and I'm really happy to get for that.
Well,
so
I'm
well
really
done.
pleased to hear that. I will
Well
pass
done.
your comments on to my colleagues who are responsible because it's their work, not mine. Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you.
I just had a last brief one. Can you tell us a bit about your acquisitions budget and policy? I mean, I imagine in your position, wonderful things come up which you'd love to have all the time, and it must be agony deciding what to go for and what to pass on.
Well, every museum in the world, whatever their resources, is never able to acquire everything that they want to have. So we have a small acquisitions budget. We are lucky that we do have an acquisitions budget. We receive some support from the state for that. We also have money through our own resources, and we also try and raise money for acquisitions through fundraising as well too. And it's wonderful, for instance, that our patrons of Irish art significantly support our acquisitions of Irish art. If I had time, I might go quickly back to it. We bought at the very end of last year, too much to say, too little time. We bought this really lovely stained glass panel by Harry Clarke, one of only six works of mythological or sort of literary themes that he did, apart from the great window in the Hugh Lane. And this we were thrilled to be able to add to the collection, and this was acquired with support from the state and also through the patrons of Irish art. So yes, acquiring is very important. There are many different ways of doing it. It's also through gifts. It's through donations. There is a wonderful scheme called the Section 003 scheme, very unsexy name, but wonderful thing, whereby individuals can give works to public collections and avail of 80% of the money back in terms of tax. So that's a huge help, and I'd love more people to know of that scheme and to be able to avail of it. A lot of the collection has come through very generous bequests and donations, and it is that that, as well as the acquisition by the gallery itself, which is so important. There are many different ways in which objects can come into collections, and obviously we'd love to have more resources to acquire, but we really, I hope, make the most of what we have and bring great things in. And in terms of an acquisition policy, our acquisition policy is on the website. We have an acquisition strategy, which we change every few years, and that really does depend to changes in the art market and also changes to what our curators are particularly interested or focused on collecting. We are trying to acquire more works by women. We are not saying that that's the only thing we're doing, but we are trying to consciously do that when we can, though we are aware that there are many times where you can't acquire works by women because there just weren't many women painting, for instance, in 17th century. This is the painting by Raquel Reusch, a wonderful painter and also scientist that we acquired for the National Collection last year. So, you know, we have varying strands in our acquisitions, but we have the portrait collection, which is really important. We have the Irish collection and the international collection.
Caroline, thank you. Fascinating. I think we'll all want to show our appreciation of Caroline. She's failed in only one way, and that is to gather any additional complaints. But in every other way, fascinating. Thank you so much.